Hi, this is Reinhard from Everyday Systems. Well, it's 3 months into 2022, and I'm still not quite done with my 2021 State of the Systems. In January, I covered body and spirits systems. In February, soul systems. Today, I'm going to talk about meta systems, systems to manage other systems, to track and bolster them. And I'm embarrassed looking over my notes to see that it's going to be extremely difficult to jam everything I want to say about them into a single episode. But I'm going to do my best. Apologies if this runs somewhat longer than usual. Personal punch cards is what I'll start with and spend the most time on. In one sense, it's one of my most personally successful systems. I've been consistently practicing it almost every day since I came up with it in 2006, I think, and have a mass of physical evidence that makes it seem real in a way that is simultaneously extremely satisfying and perhaps slightly disturbing. View the transcript page and you may behold photos not only of individual cards, but also of 15 years of cards in labeled boxes. That's 13 boxes containing over 5,000 index cards with mostly crossed out tasks and little stars scribbled on top. One might wonder whether this is evidence of a successful productivity technique or of a kind of OCD, like Carrie Madison's Post-it notes mapping terrorist networks all over her bedroom walls in Homeland. But I'll suspend judgment on that for now. Perhaps it's a bit of both. Setting aside the dubiousness of this success for a moment, another reason it's unlike NOS, Shovel Glove, and Urban Ranger, other successful systems I've been practicing more or less as they first popped into my head, is that this system has evolved a fair amount over the years, and not always in a straightforward linear way. There have been dead ends, experimental offshoots that I wound up abandoning, and there have been substantial changes. Going from the 3-column to-do listing versus 2-column, the Byzantine evolution of what all I stick on the back of the card, now an intricate system of hieroglyphs, which I shall interpret for you today, and new conventions around how I post-process a card when it's done. If you're able, hit pause now and take a look at the transcript at everydaysystems.com podcast so you can see the pictures and follow along. If you can't hit pause now, just keep listening and try to circle back to the page and take a look when you can. In the meantime, I'll try to be evocative in my descriptions. First, the front of the card. The big change from the original 3-column system is that I'm down to just 2. I've podcasted about this before, so hopefully your minds are not too blown by this information. In the original system, I had a column for life tasks on the left, a column for work tasks on the right, and a column for routine tasks that I perform every day in the middle. Now I've just got 2 columns, life on the left, work on the right, with abbreviated headers, L for life, W for work, and a dividing line down the middle. So, in this sense, and probably only in this sense, the cards have gotten simpler. The 2 columns provide a nice and clean visual way to see that work-life balance everyone is always talking about trying to maintain, and there's less junk with the routines no longer cluttering up the front. As always, there is a date on the top of the card, and everything you write here in these columns on the front of the card is a commitment to get done, ideally, that day. Life comes on the left before work because 1, it should in terms of priority. 2, all days have life tasks. Some days do not, or at least should not, have work tasks. And 3, the letter L comes before the letter W. I'm a librarian after all. Tasks are numbered in order, but there isn't necessarily any significance to the order. It just makes the tasks feel more official and important to give them numbers, and I can see at a glance how many I'm dealing with. I've podcasted before about the psychological power of even arbitrary numbers. Ideally, the priority tasks would come first, but sometimes the higher priority task only becomes apparent midday. I allow myself to keep adding tasks throughout the day and will even write down and immediately cross off tasks retroactively to give myself credit if I realize I've done something to-do list worthy without having remembered to write it down beforehand. Retroactive tasking like this is a good technique for feeling productive and increasing your morale so you actually become more productive. In a perfect world, I'd have no more than 10 tasks in each column every day, right? Because that's the number of lines there are on the card. But it's not unusual for them to spill over into a second work or life column. I write really small to allow for this with a superfine 0.38 millimeter pen, and trying to allow space for second work and life column, and trying to just budget some space for a potential second work and life subcolumn if necessary. Although permitted, spillover is a sign that maybe I'm undertaking too much. It's a visual speed bump for task hubris. There isn't room for more tasks than 2x2 subcolumns without cramped and unaesthetic scribbling at the top margin. This has happened as well. So going over 20 work or life tasks is a second major visual speed bump. Soon after that, you run into a third speed bump, a physical hard limit. Then there really isn't any more room on these 15 square inches. This is the ultimate sanity check against task hubris. So what happened to the routine tasks that I used to have in the third column? I'm still all about routines, even more so, if possible, than I used to be. They've just migrated to the back of the card, as I'll talk about shortly. And this is where the meta, other system tracking power of the cards comes in. But for now, let's stick with the front. In my original podcast on personal punch cards, I talked about how I gave myself a star on the card whenever I get all my tasks crossed off. I still do that, and I still find it just as irrationally compelling, perhaps even more so after all these years of reinforcement. It's silly, but it works, just like for kids in elementary school. I really want to cross off all those tasks every day to earn that scribbled star, that sign of approval, even just from myself. Ideally, I retire each day's index card from my wallet to a box at the end of the day, whether the tasks had been all crossed off and I earned my star or not. At least that was how I originally did things. Any undone tasks would either get copied over to the next day's card or not transferred because they weren't worth doing. And I'd circle the task on the retired card as a visual sign of acknowledgement that it didn't happen, that I was accepting it and moving on. But my desire for those stars was too intense. The stars were working too well. I found myself guiltily carrying around cards with uncrossed off to-dos for weeks sometimes because I couldn't bear to put them in my box without a star. So I developed a compromise and systematized it. I decided I'd allow myself to keep cards in my wallet for a relatively short grace period to give myself a chance to earn those stars. I'd still copy over tasks onto the new day's card for daily time budgeting. I didn't want to have this ever-increasing burden of tasks on an ever-increasing number of index cards. I'd add an exclamation point next to the copied over task on the new card to emphasize that this was a task I hadn't been able to complete on a previous card. And I'd add an additional exclamation point each time I carried it over again. So a task I hadn't done yesterday would get 1 exclamation point on today's card. 2 exclamation points if I still didn't get it done on tomorrow's card, etc. These exclamation points signal importance and get embarrassing if too many pile up. They're great little visual motivators. They also serve as reminders that when I cross off the task that I should also go through the previous cards in my wallet to cross out the task wherever it previously appeared, and hopefully then be able to star and box those cards. I'll also circle the number of the task on the older card as a signal and subtle tut-tut that although I accomplished it eventually, I didn't do it on that day. I still cross it off, but I put a little circle around the number, a little visual nudge going forward to try harder to earn my star without any circled numbers. If for some reason a task becomes obsolete, in other words, I didn't do it, but no longer have to, say because a planned meeting was canceled, I draw a squiggly line through it. This way, I don't get the false credit of a straight line, but not the shame of an uncrossed off or circled task either, and it's clear that I processed it at least. Most of my cards wind up getting starred. If not day of, then with circles eventually. My maximum grace period is a calendar month, so I'm allowed to carry around September cards in October, but by November, they've got to be out of my wallet. Note that I don't have to carry around incomplete cards, and it's very rare for a card to linger that long. I can retire a card to the box without a star. It hurts, but it is permissible and sometimes advisable. Only if I think that the undone tasks are really worth doing and really doable do I allow myself to keep carrying them around. As my wallet gets increasingly stuffed, it's a great physical incentive to make this assessment more ruthlessly and make room. So in practice, it's never all that many cards I'm carrying around. Another front of the card finesse that I've evolved is often I'll write down time boxes of effort rather than complete tasks. So instead of, say, release report as a to-do, I'll write release report 14. Release report with the number 14 in a little box after it, so literally a time box. The number is the number of minutes I will devote to this task or prompt, as I discussed in Time Box Lord last episode. Seeing that all I've committed to is 14 minutes, and that that's all I have to do to cross it off, makes me less likely to procrastinate starting. It's a very helpful technique for tasks I'm dreading, or murky tasks that I'm not sure how to even approach, which, as it turns out, is a substantial portion of the tasks in my life. Sometimes I know a task will take much longer. I will add additional time boxes on the same row, diagonally slashing each box through as it gets done and crossing off the whole row when all the boxes are slashed through. I only add an additional time box after I've slashed out the last one, rather than starting with a daunting multitude of them. I'll add a maximum of 4 14-minute time boxes to any labeled task on any row. If I wind up needing more than that, I'll add another task on another row with the same label. At that point, the cumulative amount of time, 14 times 5, is over an hour and deserves another row for just visually budgeting. Time Box Lord and personal punch cards are a powerful combination. Someone, I'm blanking on her name, on the Facebook group posted recently that putting her time boxes on her personal punch cards was how she finally got Time Box Lord to click. And if you've been struggling with Time Box Lord or the Pomodoro technique or something similar, I suggest you try combining them with punch cards as well. Or the other way around. If you're having problems with personal punch card tasks or managing tasks in some other to-do system, try making some of the tasks time boxes and maybe your task listing will finally click. If you're looking at the picture of the card on the site, you may notice the words thoughtful and dusty Donnerstag in quotes on the left and right top margins. They are reminders for recurring week daily tasks or task sets that I associate with a particular day of the week. I always try to make them start with the letter of the day of the week, even if I have to reach into a foreign language for motivational cuteness. More detail on this technique in an upcoming episode. By the way, as you may notice from the date on the card on the site, this is not an actual card I used in real life. I couldn't find a single card that had every feature I wanted to discuss here. circles, stars, squiggly lines, exclamation points, time boxes. So I created a model card to showcase them all, but all with real tasks plucked from other cards. The back of the card has changed radically, as I mentioned. This is where things get really meta. Originally, everything on the back of the card was optional and free form. Notes, tasks I didn't want to forget just yet but wasn't ready to commit to, sometimes nothing. I had many cards with completely blank backsides. But slowly, incrementally, I started adding little glyphs, boxes, sections, numbers, mostly for tracking routine tasks and personal key performance indicators, KPIs, to use a bit of revolting business speak. Numbers like how long or how many times I did this or that good or bad thing. For many years, the back of the card was the only place I tracked these things, though more recently, starting in 2016, so 5 years ago, I've been transferring some of them to my LifeLog spreadsheet once a week, which I'll discuss later this episode. Please note, the things I track on the back of the card are very idiosyncratic and personal. I'm not suggesting you or anyone else on the planet should be tracking the exact same things in the exact same way as I do. I'm going to selectively talk you through my back of the card just as an example, just so you can get a concrete sense of how something like this might work for you with your different habits, routines, and personal key performance indicators. Unlike the front of the card, I orient the back of the card vertically, portrait mode. At the top are 3 rows that I draw with lines for quantitative tracking, one for one of them is for body tracking, one for soul tracking, and one for spirits tracking. As with the organization of this State of the Systems review, I find it helpful to divide my self-improvement efforts into those 3 categories, vaguely inspired by the Platonic tripartite self. At the bottom of the card, I have 3 more rows for qualitative tracking of these same 3 categories. So a sort of mini diary with any notes, right? The numbers go on top, the words go on the bottom. The middle of the card is still available for free-form notes and reminders. Each quantitative tracking row contains sections, boxes, little symbols or icons that I draw to prompt me for inputs. I'm not going to talk about every single one because 1, you'll fall asleep. 2, they are really personal and idiosyncratic and yours will be slightly different. And 3, they'll change. I keep tweaking them and next month they'll likely be something ever so different. So I'll give a selective tour to give a flavor. On the body row, all the way at the top, I have 6 boxes or cells. As with everything on the back of this card, I always put the same inputs in the same place in the same order. For some, I draw a little symbol. In the body row, a little slashed out S to track no S diet compliance. A little fat letter T looking thing for a shovel glove. Right, it's supposed to be a picture of a sledgehammer. Something that looks vaguely like a shower head for contrast showers, aka Scottish showers, aka James Bond showers, which is a 1-minute invigoratingly bracing cold shower taken after a hot shower, a technique I read about in Dopamine Nation. For some, a letter or pair of letters is my input prompt, like UR for Urban Ranger. My preference is always to draw a cute symbol, but sometimes I just can't think of one that's also easy and quick to draw. For some, it's just the location or an empty box in a certain place. I've internalized them pretty well at this point. But in case my brain gives out, I can always consult yesterday's card as a template. At the end of the row, I count dumbbell shadowboxing stretches, did I do them, and the number of pull-ups and push-ups in 2 sets each. The next row is soul. I divide it into 2 main sections with little checkboxes, with a little checkbox in the middle. The checkbox is tracking for whether I listen to my self-recorded mantras, which I've podcasted about before and update periodically depending on what I'm struggling with at the moment. In fact, I'm going to say a little more about the mantras later this episode. On the left section, I write in all caps an acronym, the letters FRABCRYMS, Frab Crimes, which sounds vaguely like something out of Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. And crimes makes it seem like something excitingly transgressive, as if I could somehow be the cool, naughty kid and the gold star kid both at the same time. The fact that it's pronounceable and sort of funny sounding and redolent of Lewis Carroll and whatnot helps me remember it. F is for free prayer, R is for recited prayer, A is for Anki card review, C is for creative time, writing these podcast scripts, for example. Y is minutes spent working on my yellow cards, aka the punch card itself. M is for meditation minutes, S is for study habit focused reading time. Frab crimes. Some of these I measure with a stroke indicating how many times I did it or that I did it at all, others with a minute count. Then comes spirits. One section for alcoholic spirits, how many drinks did I have and roughly how big. I have a simple classification system from small, medium, big, and huge. Which later, when I transfer them into the life log, I have a formula for converting into standard DMV normalized drinks. The other section is for pills of all sorts. Melatonin or Benadryl for sleep. Did I take any Ativan for anxiety before that super stressful meeting? How much? Low smoking gets tracked here too. All stuff I want to keep at the lowest possible level, ideally 0, but knowing that I have to write the number here helps me at least keep it close to that. After these rows, I have a space I sometimes use for minimalistic BLD food logging. BLD for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that I mentioned in my first State of the Systems episode this year. I don't normally do food logging, but if my weight goes over a certain threshold, for me, weekly average of over 173 or any individual number over 176, I make myself do it as a sort of punitive mindfulness exercise, usually during or after vacations or multi-S-day holidays when my average drifts above my preferred 170 pounds. When I get back under the threshold, I can stop. It's very minimalistic and doesn't involve counting calories or anything. The point is, it's an additional speed bump against excess to catch you before you stuff that extra whatever in your mouth. Because you think, hey, do I really want to have to write this down? And when my behavior and weight are good, and I'm not BLD logging, the desire to keep not having to do that is motivating. There was a time when I would also transfer this BLD logging into my life log spreadsheet at the end of the week, but that was way too time consuming. That went beyond punitive mindfulness into cruel and unusual punishment. The index card speed bump is sufficient, having to write it down there. And the hope is that eventually the mere threat of the index card speed bump will be sufficient. We'll see. This is still relatively new. The middle of the card is still free form, notes, shopping lists, tasks I don't want to forget, but I'm not ready to commit to by writing them on the front of the card. On the bottom, there are 3 qualitative rows for body, soul, and spirits corresponding to the top 3 quantitative roles, a sort of focused mini diary. It's like private tweets to myself, organized by category. In body, I write about the various aches and pains to try to respond to injuries and keep track of how they're doing. My runner's knee, my golfer's elbow, etc. Now that I'm middle-aged, it seems there's always something to put there. In soul, I give a 1-sentence assessment of how I was feeling that day and a mood score to try to sum it up. The idea being to see how my various habit experiments and routines correlate with a general feeling of well-being. In spirits, I note, for example, the circumstances under which a glass ceiling failure happened. I fess up. Any or all of these 3 mini diary boxes can be left empty, and that's usually a good sign when they're empty. No news is good news. Except soul, where I'm eager to record happy mood scores and assessments. Most of what I write on my daily punch card stays there, and that's the beginning and the end of it. But some of it gets transferred to my life log, the spreadsheet where I keep track of a subset of numbers from my yellow cards. The life log is basically the habit cal that I talked about years ago on steroids. a mostly quantitative diary of how I'm doing on all my habits and routines, with a habit traffic light, hues of green and red, automatically applied by conditional formatting. As you may recall, every year I start a new life log, one spreadsheet per calendar year. I use Google Sheets, but Excel or LibreOffice or Numbers will work just as well. In 2016, when I started, my life log was a single tab in that spreadsheet. By 2021, it had proliferated to 8. Definitely Homeland Carry OCD level. That was a little insane. Now, in 2022, I'm back down to 4. One for body, one for soul, one for spirits, to match all the other places I track stuff like that, and a monthly summary tab which gives monthly averages for key columns drawn from each of the other tabs. I spend a lot of time agonizing over which key fields to summarize there, because I don't want it to be overwhelming. I want to be able to see everything in one screen without scrolling, and I want the color signals of the conditional formatting, the red or the greenness of each cell, to jump out at me and not get lost in a sea of busyness. One nice thing about restarting your life log every year is that it's an opportunity for a fresh start, to reevaluate what data you are tracking, what columns, what tabs, is it too much, how to organize them. But you can keep the past years intact as a record. So it's not like you're messing with history, or at least ancient history, when you make tweaks for the future. It's not like I don't make tweaks throughout the year, but it's limited to that year, and I try to save the major revolutions for January and a new sheet. I don't typically update my life log every day. Once a week, on Saturday mornings, I go through my personal punch cards from the week before and transfer select data on them to my life log. When a card is processed, I'll write LL on it next to the star, or where the star should be, so I can see it's done and then file the card in my box, unless I'm hanging on to it because there's unfinished business. I also download a week of data from Fitbit and transfer the bits I care about. At the moment, weight, sleep minutes, total sleep minutes, step count. And I'm experimenting with calories burned too. It can take half an hour or more, I'm embarrassed to admit, this whole process, but I love it. I love this updating my cards and the life log. I feel like I have all the mess in my life under control, at least for a moment, at least some control, or at least under observation. It's not total chaos. And often, as with my weekly audio didact voice memo review I described last episode, I'm pleasantly surprised that, wow, this wasn't such a bad week after all, even though I felt completely kaput by Friday evening. My mood ratings, except for that one day, were really good. My golfer's elbow is really getting better, and I didn't miss a single Urban Ranger walk or contrast shower, etc. Or, by contrast, okay, that was bad. That excuse for an est day was clearly BS, but I see it, and I can respond to it. It didn't just slip under the radar. My air defense systems are working. That thought energizes me, even when I do see bogeys blip up. I sometimes worry that the life log and personal punch cards, not to mention my audio didact recordings, are obsessive and narcissistic practices. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," but the over-examined life ain't that great either. I'm sure there's at least an element of anxious vanity, navel-gazing mixed in with the good in what I'm doing. But my experience has been, in the short times when I was lax with these systems or didn't do them at all, that the feeling of chaos that rushed in was far worse. And not just for me, but for the people around me. I would like to be the sort of person who didn't need such things. I'd like to be the sort of person who doesn't need a system for diet, who is intuitively rather than systematically moderate. But I'm not. The life log and personal punch cards are great for dealing with the many little details of life. Mantrafication is for reminding oneself of and focusing on the essentials. It's basically an offshoot of a special case of autodidact, except instead of just recording thoughts and observations that I maybe listen to just once, I record something I want to remind myself of repeatedly, highly personalized pep talks and warnings. I listen to them every day and track my compliance in doing this, in listening to them, on my personal punch card and life log. I update my mantras fairly frequently, every few months, as what I need to encourage and warn myself about changes. I classify Mantrafication as a meta system because very frequently what I'm encouraging and warning myself about has to do with another everyday system, usually honing in on some corner case where I'm self-BSing myself to get around my own rules. Like many systems, Mantrafication started simple, got complex, and then became simpler again. My middle period mantras got quite numerous and lengthy. At the system's convoluted peak, I was listening to 14 mantras, totaling over 18 minutes. So many that I scheduled different mantras for different days because it was too time-consuming to go through all of them every day. Now I'm down to just 3, one for body, one for soul, one for spirits, a total of just under 2 minutes. This is a lot less obtrusive and more sustainable, something I really can and do listen to every day. But I'm glad I went through that more loquacious period because it helped me deepen my self-understanding and developed a more compact vocabulary with which to exhort myself. Something that initially took me 2 minutes to explain and re-explain to myself is now so ingrained that I can refer to it with a single evocative word or phrase. Every once in a while, theoretically monthly, but I haven't been very formal about this, I'll re-listen to my old mantras so they don't fade completely and my compact vocabulary gets recharged. So I'm very careful before recording a new mantra to always say the date so that when I'm re-listening, I can quickly place it in historical context. I wish I could share an actual full mantra with you, but they are very, very personal, not just in terms of personal equals private, but as I mentioned, they're expressed in this evolved, compressed language that only makes sense if you're me and have this history of self-referential self-exhortation. Maybe in a future episode I can share and explicate some excerpts. But this episode has gone on long enough. I'm guessing this is already my longest yet. So it is fortunate that I don't have much to say about my last system, loose lip sink ships. In fact, the whole point of it is not saying too much. The idea is not to squander your excitement about a new system or goal by talking about it too much, to cash in on the emotional reward before you've earned it, and depriving yourself of the motivation to hold out for it. It continues to work well for me. But loose lips sink ships is all about balance. It's also good, as I pointed out in that podcast, sometimes to share what you're excited about with friends and to get encouragement and feedback and maybe generously encourage and inspire them. And so in that spirit, my friends, to conclude this podcast, here are some titles of prospective podcast episodes that I hope might pique your interest. Some will be baffling, some, I hope, intriguing. Let me know if any resonate, or if there are any other subjects you'd like to hear about. In no particular order. 1. Clock and Calendar, Your Sword and Shield. 2. Aristotelian Self-Portrait, a self-assessment technique inspired by the Aristotelian observation, you are what you repeatedly do. 3. Demi-Human, or How to Be Ordinary, a follow-up on VC Cat. 4. Demogorgon Whack-A-Mole, how your appetites always seem to reroute around your willpower's attempts to control them, and what to do about it. 5. Negative Ambition. We've covered a lot of the 7 deadly sins with everyday systems, but not yet envy. This is kind of sort of that. Envy for demi-humans, maybe. 6. Right relationship with robots. This is Weekend Luddite writ large. What aspects of technology to tolerate, what to embrace, what to cast into outer darkness. 7. The metaphysics of to-do listing. I'm also thinking of doing a couple of book reviews or responses, one on Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke, and another on The Courage to be Disliked, a contemporary Japanese take on the early 20th century Viennese psychologist Alfred Adler in the form of a Platonic dialogue. It's rare that a book in the self-help genre impresses me. I think the only other one I ever podcasted about was Marie Kondo's, but these two did. If I manage to do all of these at the episode a month clip I've been keeping more or less these last few months, that should be enough to round out the year. And I promise, 2022's review, if there is one, will not be this exhaustive. Thanks for listening.